Diller, we perfect. We are so glad today that we have Meredith returning with our media literacy series. She is going to talk to us about being influenced. If you are, which I assume many of us, if not all, are on social media and using social media as a way for one of our news sources, then we may be influenced by some of the things that we're seeing. So we're going to turn the time over to Meredith, who's going to talk to us about ways that we may be influenced through the ways that we get our news.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. I'm so happy to see so many people on here. Let me share my screen. Let me try. Okay, can you see that okay, Jiller? Thumbs up? Okay, great. Okay, so like Rachel said, today we're going to talk about what it means to be influenced. And we had a great series come out this week on Monday on our social media channels about influencers. And so I kind of wanted to piggyback off of that and expand on it a little bit. If you haven't seen it, you can go to our Instagram page or Facebook, or on our new app, our MWIG Central app. You can see it on there too. So we're going to talk about being influenced in a broad sense and also in kind of a more narrow sense. So even if you're not on social media, I hope that this gives you some things to think about and you feel like it applies to you as well. So I found this cool article that actually just came out in the New York Times that talks about influencers and where the idea of being influenced came from. And it actually came from in the 14th century. People felt like celestial bodies, like stars and planets, were influencing people. And so that's actually where that word comes from. I saw that was kind of a neat little tidbit that I would throw in there because we have been feeling like we're influenced by a variety of different things for many centuries. And over time, the idea of being influenced by people has evolved, especially in like the 1800s, started coming up in newspapers, this concept of being influenced. The word was seen more frequently. And then that kind of evolved as mass media became more available to people. I found these posters that were published by the government that were related to influencing women that I thought were interesting. So I put those on here. That as media has grown and expanded, so has people's and companies and organizations' desire to influence us. So obviously, the government has tried to influence us. Companies selling products have tried to influence us. And that has occurred over, you know, forever. It's just becoming more and more apparent and more and more a part of our lives as media surrounds us in so many different ways now. Okay. I put this on there because Time just came out with its like 100 most influential people of the year. I don't know if you've seen that yet. It just came out. But this is from a few years ago. These were their covers of their 100 most influential people. But as in the modern era, we think of influencers a lot of times as like a very specific niche on social media. Um, but anybody can be an influencer. We'll talk more about that. These are people who Time Magazine thought were very influential to us. I think this was in 2019. Um, they shape people's opinions, they impact society, and um, in a big way. And then there's people who do that also in a small way. We'll talk more about that in a little bit too. But today, when we talk about influencers, you hear the word a lot now. We're often talking about online content creators who drive opinions and actions of their followers. So there are people who have, a TikTok account or an Instagram account, and they have people who watch them, sometimes tens and thousands of people, and sometimes they create income streams using their online presence. So I know I follow several influencers who have paid partnerships with companies to market their products. And that brings up a whole host of ethical issues because there are actually regulations around influencers and how um, they're supposed to let people know when they're being paid to advertise a product, and that doesn't always happen, and it's not well controlled right now, so that can be problematic. But it's something to keep in mind. Um, I know there's lots of influencers who make money, like I said, off of paid partnerships through advertisements. They might curate like online shopping pages through Amazon, or there's like a whole variety of companies that will let influencers create, like, here's what I'm wearing, and you can click on their account and you can go buy those things. Or they might get subscriptions, paid subscriptions, and that's how they make their money. So they're giving you messages for a specific purpose, and that's really important to keep in mind when we're talking about specifically social media influencers. There's a couple things I wanted to show you on here. First, I know this graphic is hard to see, so I'm going to click on it. And I hope you can you see the web page, Jillaire? Okay. So there's this really cool graphic that I found, and this is actually from 2021. And this shows the world's top social media influencers. It's changed since 2021. But I thought this was super interesting. And this is a graphic I've linked. Yes, Jillaire? Would you
Or
like to?
the numbers, like the 455 million for Justin Bieber, is that his number of followers?
Yes.
Okay. At first, I thought that was how much money they were making when the graphic was smaller. And I was like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah, no. Yeah,
Okay,
it's how many
cool.
followers they have.
Super
And
interesting.
so it's really interesting to look at. Like I said, it's changed. So it's a lot of these top people are celebrities or athletes. And then as you get farther down, you finally start getting some of the like gaming or like YouTube influencers start popping up. Like I think PewDiePie, which I've never watched, but I know is very popular. He used to be the number one influencer or most viewed account on YouTube. He's not anymore, from what I've seen. But yeah, so this just gives you an idea of some of the people who are considered influencers. Also, there's politicians on here, in case you missed it. Barack Obama's on here, Modi's on here. So I found that to be really interesting. There's also more recently what came out. Oh, I gotta go back. Sorry, guys. Forbes came out with a list of the top creators of 2023. And it's this really spiffy article that they created. But right now, the number one influencer in the United States is an account called Mr. Beast. And they actually do estimate on here how much money influencers earn. So they estimate that he earns $82 million a year, which is a ton of money. And in the influencer economy is in the hundreds of billions of dollars worldwide
Can I,
right.
Meredith, can I ask a
Yeah.
question?
Yeah.
Uh, so when they are they trying to get away from using the term influencer, because I see that they use creators on Forbes, and you know some people call them creators and other people call them influencers. So are
Yeah.
they? I think of those interchangeably, but is there a reason why one is one and one's the other?
I think it's based off of whether or not you can assume their intention. So, like, I think there are people who come online who will tell you they're an influencer and they are trying to change your opinion or your buying habits. And there's people who are content creators who maybe aren't necessarily um, like sponsored by a bunch of companies, and they don't really believe they're trying to change anything about what you're doing. They're just trying to provide entertainment or information. And so those people might consider themselves more content creators. That's kind of my understanding. Does that make sense?
Yep, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are just some of the top creators right now. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I found that to be really interesting. And that's, you can look on Forbes top creators to learn more about that. But let me go back to my presentation. Okay. So the title of that slide was the democratization of influence. I'm actually just going to go back to that really quick. So, as the internet has exploded, and especially when blogs became more and more popular, um, there was a lot of talk about how influence became democratized, in that, like, anybody could have a platform or a voice on the internet. And garner an audience. And that's so much different than, even, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, when the only people who really had access to providing influence were people who were famous or who had control of, print. And so it's really changed so much that now anybody could, potentially become an influencer. And it's given us, there's pros to that and there's cons to that. It's creates really a flood of information for us that can be overwhelming. But there are a lot of positive aspects, and we're going to talk about both. Um, but what makes someone an influencer, or what makes them successful as an influencer on social media, is that they provide content that looks authentic, relatable, and credible, or in some cases their lifestyle is presented as more like aspirational. Like, I think, I've seen in my reels sometimes people who seem to have like a really lavish lifestyle, and for some people who spend their time on social media, that's really attractive, and they would like to get, an insight into that kind of lifestyle that maybe that they don't share right now. Influencers, though, curate their content so that their followers only see what people want what they want people to see. So that's really important to remember. It's just like us when we post things on social media. Like, we're not posting everything about our lives. Maybe we're only posting like the highlights. And that's the same as in with influencers. They're not showing us um everything about their lives. They're showing us a particular snapshot or image that they're curating, often to sell a product or persuade us to an idea. But there's some people who are really successful at this. I will say some of my favorite influencers personally are people who run um I like to read, so I like book accounts, and the ones that I follow, I really like find them to be authentic and relatable. And there's one that I follow who was a librarian, so I find her to be credible. So I find that these traits can be really powerful, and it's something to think about when you're considering your favorite influencers, is what's attracting you to them, and that can help you be a little bit more thoughtful about their content. Also, with as they build that relationship of authenticity and relatability, they can often get you to buy things, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's like having a friend online who's recommending a product or a service that they found has worked for them. It's kind of what it feels like, right? And I've definitely had times when I've ordered something because an influencer has recommended it, and it comes to my house and I tell my husband I've been influenced. He'll be like, "What is this?" And I've been like, "I was influenced." So it happens, and sometimes I've really been grateful that I found that product through that influencer. So it's not always a bad thing, but it's something we have to be conscious about, um when we are being persuaded to buy something or to do something by these people online. Okay, so like I said, there's influencers aren't all bad. There's pros and cons. Influencers can be hugely entertaining. They can be very informative. There are so many niche interests that influencers provide content on that you can connect with, and you can find community in that particular interest. Like, literally anything. You could find an influencer or become an influencer about it. Like, one that kind of blows my mind a little bit is like, um people who like are emu farmers. Like, I have never wanted to be an emu farmer, but I find sometimes there's one creator in particular, her content is hilarious because she's always talking to her emu and he's always interrupting. But like, that's like super niche, and you would never find that anywhere else. There's also the potential that it connects you with people who have top expertise that you wouldn't get access to otherwise, whether they be journalists or doctors or whatever. It also exposes you to new ideas and new concepts, or maybe unique perspectives that you've never heard before. So on this flip side, in the same vein, um, I didn't put this on the con side necessarily, but sometimes because of the way the algorithms in our social media are structured, we can also get too narrow of a view from influencers if we're not actively seeking out a diversity of opinions. Influencers also, there's a huge problem right now with influencers spreading so much false information, especially around current events and around like health and wellness or the medical field. Those are two areas where there's just countless influencers spreading so much false information that is hearsay that they don't have expertise on. Um, Unfortunately, we mentioned this before, influencers don't always disclose their financial interests or their conflicts of interests in their account. So what might look like somebody who's super relatable, and you build this online following for them and you get insights into their life and you don't realize maybe they don't disclose that they're actually selling a specific product or they're affiliated with a certain organization. And that's not really ethical, but it's also not always well enforced. Um, Oh, I guess I did put this on there. They may only provide a narrow view of a topic. We want to get a diversity of opinions. That's something we talk about a lot on here. And also something that's important to remember is like big influencers, it may look like they work alone, but if people have a lot of followers, they probably have some kind of production team behind them. But they might not have an editorial team. And what I mean by that is when stuff gets published on a news website, um, usually those articles go through a team of people um, who act as editors, and they're very critical of what is written and they want to make sure that it's accurate. And that's not necessarily the case with influencers. They may not have people looking at their content with a critical eye and making sure it's factual before it goes to publish. So those are all really important things to keep in mind. Okay, another interesting thing that's caught my eye in the last few years is influencers have become more and more involved in politics. So actually, I think it was a couple of years ago, the Biden White House invited a huge group of influencers, social media influencers, to the White House to meet with their press team because they're courting influencers to kind of help shape public opinion. So politicians, PR offices outside of their own politicians' social media pages are more and more frequently reaching out to social media influencers to amplify their messaging, because politicians want to make sure they reach lots of audiences and get FaceTime with people they maybe wouldn't ordinarily reach. And so they want to use lots of different influencers to talk about specific issues or to like talk up a certain candidate, so they can shape some public opinion and also get broader reach with the algorithms. Because, if you follow an influencer, but you're not super interested in politics, you may never hear about these political opinions. But if you follow that influencer and they start talking about that political issue, you're more likely to hear it.
Meredith,
So,
I think there are probably like all of these issues, pros and cons for how this works, because
yeah,
I feel like I remember that the White House used influencers during the pandemic to try
yes,
to get out good information to try to promote vaccines even,
yes,
right?
yes,
And so I think in that instance, for them to say, okay, they're not listening to the White House, let's see who they'll listen to that we can say, go get vaccinated and do these things.
yeah,
But right, like with all things, you got to be careful.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It can be used for really beneficial, like public health purposes, for example, but it is also used for like definitely partisan political issues as well. And it's, another thing to be aware of. And then it's interesting because as we talk about influencers, I was recently in a webinar with some media literacy, news literacy experts, and one thing they really emphasized, especially going into the election year, is the biggest purveyors of misinformation tend to be politicians themselves when it comes to political misinformation, because politicians themselves have such a huge influence on public opinions and attitudes, and we kind of form this this mindset of like he's my guy or that's my girl and I trust them and I believe them, and it really becomes actually I think Stacy's still on this call, we were talking about this recently. It becomes this cycle of politicians using inflammatory language or voicing their opinion on a topic, and then their constituents kind of latching on to that, and politicians saying, well, my constituents believe this now, so I have to do this thing. Anyway, it becomes like this very like interesting and potentially problematic cycle. And so there's a lot of misinformation experts that believe that politicians themselves actually have a bigger impact on the spread of false information than just regular social media. So it's something to think about. Um, there's a lot of people who have a lot of faith and trust in politicians, and we've talked on MWAG a lot about making sure we're voting on principle and not on party or on person. And that's where this really comes into play. Is obviously there's no perfect people, there's no perfect politicians, and it's really important for us to listen to the issues and to think about what values we hold and vote and act based upon those things and not what a politician is telling us to do. So okay, these are from the end of our social media slideshow that Tiffany Turtipis, our lead designer, created. So I cannot take credit for this beautiful slide, but these are some questions I came up with as you're consuming content, especially on social media. Ask yourself these kinds of questions. Is this what makes this person qualified to speak on this particular topic? I cannot tell you. I have friends who have become influencers who have gained pretty big followings, and they will speak on topics that I know they don't have expertise on, and it really concerns me. Like maybe they're not a mental health professional, but they speak extensively about mental health and like give advice on what people should do. And that just makes me really uncomfortable. So it's really important when you see a reel or something on a video on TikTok or whatever on social media, you want to ask what makes this person qualified to speak on this. The second question is, how did they get the information they're sharing? Do they have is it a personal experience? Does that personal experience reflect broader experiences, or and then do they cite their sources? There are a lot of really good professional expert influencers, and they will cite their sources. And especially if they don't and you ask, they will often point you in the right direction. What are other experts saying about the information being shared? So it's important to get a variety of viewpoints on a topic, especially like when it comes to health issues um, and current events. You want to ask yourself, is this video um, giving me the full truth, or what are other people saying? Is there disagreement, or is this something that's settled? And then you want to ask yourself, what is this content creator trying to persuade me to do or feel? So, like in the case of this, one of the influencers I really like, who focuses on books. I know she's trying to make me more interested in books, and sometimes she's trying to persuade me to maybe try out a product or a service that she thinks her followers would like, and she wants me to feel like um I'm part of like this niche like book club. And so I like that. I recognize that's what she's doing. There's other content creators who maybe play off of people's fear and worry and anxiety a little more. And so it's really important that if you're experiencing some kind of like flood, especially negative emotion, where you're like feeling outrage or fear, or you're just like, I cannot believe this happened, how dare they, that's a really big signal to pause and to say, wait, what are they trying to do here? What are they trying to persuade me to do or to feel? And maybe why would they be doing that? What makes it in their interest to do that? Another question is, would it be better for me to get personalized advice on this topic? um Jillera mentioned COVID before. There was all kinds of social media false information that was going around about how to treat COVID. And a lot of people took it. A lot of people took that advice and took, medications or chemicals. And this happens all the time with especially other illnesses. Would it be better for me to get personalized advice on this topic? Do I need to visit with a lawyer or a doctor or someone who is an expert who knows my specific situation rather than getting it from this social media account?
Well, and like you were saying, the person who's trying to dispense kind of mental health advice,
Yeah.
right? Like go see a therapist yourself. And I will say, like, I feel like a lot of times social media exposes me to ideas that then make me say, oh, I didn't know that to ask this question. Like I didn't know that was out there. Now I know to maybe ask that question of
Yes.
my own doctor, though, right?
Yes.
And so I think there are a lot of ways that influencers can expose us to new ideas. But I
Yes.
like this advice to like say, but should I take that or should I use that as a way to then go seek personalized advice? But I have a little more information now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've gone to healthcare professionals before and I've said, "Hey, I saw this thing on social media. Like, what do you think about this?" And that way, like, I can have curiosity about that idea and also like get other opinions from them on the same thing. So, um, and then the last question is, are they being paid to create this content? So it's not always very clear when they're being paid. Sometimes it's like in hashtags in the caption. But you want to look for words like ad, sponsored, ambassador, partner. Those are all indications that they are being paid to produce the content. And I know for me, sometimes that can skew my opinion a little bit. Sometimes people will say, well, I'm being honest with you, even though I'm getting paid. And, you can kind of judge for yourself, like how much trust you put in that. Um, but it's really important to be aware of when people are getting paid because not a lot of people will say something bad about a product and still get paid for it. So, something to keep in mind. And I just want to say, I'll go back to this really quickly. These are all, if you have kids, especially teenagers who are on social media, or even younger kids who watch TV or YouTube, these are all things that you can talk about with them, like at an age appropriate level. You can sit and have a little lesson with them about, like you saw, what is that commercial about? Why do you think they showed it? Um, and those are all ways to think about how media is influencing them. And those are really important skills to develop, especially if you have kids who use TikTok or who look at reels on other social media accounts. Those are just we just our brain gets kind of overloaded by those messages, and we have to teach it how to slow down and react and think critically. And the earlier we can help our kids do that, the better. So, um, okay.
Meredith, this
Yeah.
was making me think kind of some of the negative effects of it is that there's somebody that I follow who just tells funny stories and
Mhm.
it's just kind of delightful. But then she had people come after her who were telling her that they wanted her to take a stance on the Israel Palestine conflict.
Yeah.
And that's not even anything like she's not political. Um, she doesn't claim to, that's never been anything on her page. And then people came after her and said, well, you have to take a stance. And essentially, like she kind of disappeared. And I don't know, it's one of those things like, well, how long will she be gone until the conflict's over or until she feels like she can come back? But I feel like it takes a lot of integrity for somebody like that who has that influence to say, I don't have an opinion. I'm not an expert, you know, and to not use that stance to influence. Does that make sense?
100%. Absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought that up because, like you said, it does take a lot of integrity. She knows, I know who you're talking about. Like, and I'm sure there's other content creators who are the same way, but like she knows what her area of expertise is or what her category of content is. And she doesn't want to lead people astray or start talking about things that she doesn't feel like she knows enough about. And I think as consumers, we have to try to be respectful of that. And it's sad that people weren't in that situation and aren't, for other creators as well. But it goes both ways, right? Like we have to respect people's integrity and their desire to not stray off of their, off of their content category. And they have to produce content um, that's not going to provide a negative impact on people. So yeah, absolutely. Um, and a lot of content creators will talk about bullying online and how harmful that is to them. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. Um, so these are some questions I put out here that nobody needs to answer aloud, but just to think about is who do you consider the biggest influences on your life, regardless of their following? Like they don't need to be on social media. Just something to think about. Like who are the biggest influences for you and why? What makes them influential? Um, somebody said FHE next Monday. Oh, okay. Yes. FHE next Monday for this topic. I love that. But yeah, something to think about. Who influences you? Who do you admire? Like who do you talk about when news comes out about them? Or just in your family, like whose opinion has the biggest sway on you? Something to consider. And then do you consider yourself an influencer? I can say that you are. Even if you don't have an account with 10,000 followers that is monetized, I can almost guarantee you, I know for myself, I don't share a lot on social media. But when I do, I often have people come talk to me about what I shared. They'll say, "Oh man, I saw you posted that thing." And, they want to talk more about it. Or they'll say, "Oh, that was such a cute photo that you posted of your daughter," or whatever. And that's having influence. Like you're making an impact on people. And it's important to remember that whatever we create and we put out there, we are influencing people, whether it's just within our families or our workplaces, or whether it's what we post online. So I think that's really important to remember, and it's an important thing for us to teach, our kids and our families as well. And then I just want to close with this quote from President Nelson that he just gave uh, a couple of weeks ago. He said, "Sisters, please never underestimate the extraordinary power within you to influence others for good. We need your ability as women to detect deception and to articulate truth. We need your inspired wisdom in your family, ward, and state councils, as well as in other places of influence throughout the world." So I just want to close with that idea that influencing isn't all bad. We have to be really aware of what we're consuming, as always, and about the expertise and the motives of the people who are creating content for us. But influencers can also have great positive impacts, and um, we can be positive influencers and make a difference in the world as we strive to create content that is positive, and as we strive to share our knowledge and be peacemakers in the world. And that's all I have to share today, unless there's any questions.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions for Meredith? I don't see any questions in the chat. Thank you for reminding us about this. I think it's always such a great thing when we do the media literacy series that we have this reminder to be good consumers, but also this helps us remember to be like good producers, right?
Yeah.
Like what we're
Yeah.
putting out there and what we're sharing. And I think that MWAG creates such great content that is shareable, and I think for our members. So I would encourage people to find the things that when you click a heart on something, maybe on MWAG's social media platforms that you follow, to share those things that you feel like might influence people for good. So I just want to encourage people to share those kind of things. Meredith, thank you as always for preparing, and Julia, thanks for helping in a pinch for me. Next week, we are going to have Megan Seawright join us. She is going to do an MWAG year in review. So we are going to talk about the things that MWAG has accomplished in the year 2023. And so if you've lost count or you are new here, this is a great way to see all the different ways that MWAG has been involved all around the country And you might see some things that are close and in your community. So we hope that you'll come back and join us next week. And until then, we'll say see you later. Thanks for coming.